Hello, and welcome to the Come to Your Senses podcast. I'm your host, embodiment-based coach, Mary Lofgren. Here, we explore how to live bravely and beautifully through a lifestyle of embodiment. You'll hear gems to empower you around mindset, mindfulness, somatic psychology, and neuroscience, as well as beauty, food, style, and the art of slow living to meet your soul through the senses. I am so happy that you're here. Let's begin. Hello, beautiful beings, and welcome to Come to Your Senses. I am bursting like a fig with excitement about today's episode. I've been preparing and doing my favorite thing. You might hear my book rustling in the background, but one of the moments where I feel most profoundly grateful for the work that I do is when I think, I need to visit my personal library to gather some research and information for today's episode. And I go and I pluck a book like Seductress, Women Who Ravished the World and Their Lost Art of Love by one of my great muses, Betsy Prioleau, off the shelf. I mean, how lucky am I that working means reading the book Seductress? It is such a blessing, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so excited to share with you today some of my gems from my personal collection on the art of embodying Ageless Allure. This episode actually came by special request from one of our listeners. So thank you so much, Elle, for your request and desire around this topic. And as a listener, if you are thinking, man, I'd really love to hear a come to your senses approach about this issue or this aspect of my life, or if you could imagine sitting down across the table with me, a question you might like to ask me, please go to schoolofsensualliving.com/want. I respond to every single request with gratitude, and I am so delighted and tickled to hear your wants for this podcast. So, on to today's topic. Right now, in the US, there is a movie circulating called Book Club. And there was a first chapter in this movie. It was super popular. Jane Fonda, Diane Keaton, Candice Bergen, Mary Steenburgen. And while I may or may not see this movie in the theater, I am so delighted every time I see a movie like this coming out, because I believe that the relationship between aging and sexuality are a measure of the freedom and the embodiment of a society. And Book Club has a lot of sexual undertones and sexual characters. And I remember growing up watching The Golden Girls and being both repulsed and enraptured by Blanche Devereaux. I always identified as a Rose, but I secretly wanted to be a Blanche. Stories are what shape and etch the tablet in our minds of what we know as truth. I'm always humbled to remember when I was 16 years old, sitting in Hebrew scripture class. I went to a Catholic school. Sister Catherine saying to us the myth of Adam and Eve. And it was like, like record scratch. Like, what do you mean by myth? Like, I was 16 before I even questioned the idea that Adam and Eve was simply an archetypal story rather than the biological, scientific reality of the creation of the human race. And so with this movie Book Club, what I'm so excited about is the way in which women are positioned in this movie, not only as free, many of them single, financially independent, but also as sexual beings in their 80s. And so with that, let us not delay the temptation any longer, and let's dive into our gems on Ageless Allure. We're going to take a brief intermission because there's something I'm so excited to tell you about, and it starts with a question. Do you ever wish you could have an interpreter for the messages of your body? Someone to help you discern the voice of impulse from the true callings of your intuition? Do you crave more flow, more richness, more meaning, and more relaxed magnetism in your everyday? If you love what you hear on this podcast, I want to invite you to be bold and to imagine the possibilities of having a fully supported coaching container with yours truly. I have just opened my books to welcome in 3 new coaching clients in the month of May. But you won't find a speck of information about my coaching on the internet because I want you to feel the experience of coaching with me even more than I want you to know about it. And that's why I've created a beautiful, full-color book to describe embodied intelligence coaching. Part Mad Libs, part coloring book, part brochure, this captivating catalog will draw you into an experience of embodiment and invite you to imagine the possibilities of relying not only on your brilliant mind, but on the full, rich, limitless landscape of your full embodied intelligence. Let's bathe your neural pathways in beauty and meet your soul through the senses at schoolofsensualliving.com/coaching today. So where we're going to begin, my friends, is with what I consider a biblical text around this topic, which is the book I mentioned called Seductress: Women Who Ravished the World and Their Lost Art of Love by Betsy Prioleau. Betsy is a friend of mine. She's been a guest on, 10 years ago when I would just produce audios instead of having a podcast. I produced an audio with Betsy. I've been a guest on a podcast that she had at one time, and I adore her as a human, but her book really acted as a keystone in my own exploration of seduction, not as a tool of manipulation and control, but as a way of funneling and potentizing and owning my power as a woman and as a sensual being. And Betsy, just in case you're listening, it's actually one of my dreams to someday record an audiobook, be the voice of your audiobook. So maybe I'll email you and tell you that desire sometime. Regardless, each chapter in this book is such a gem about transcending some of the myths around female sensuality and power, and chronicles historically the way in which these stories are happening, but have been systemically erased. And so I want to read a few paragraphs to you from chapter 4, which is the chapter on silver foxes. They captured the choice men with their conventional brilliance and mature charms, and decided important questions of state at their influential salons. Debutantes powdered their hair white to emulate these silver foxes, just as seniors today color up to look young. Contrary to myth, elder seductresses have never gone out of style. The powers of fascination in a fascinating woman only potentiate with time. In maturity, women gain formidable allures denied to the young. They cast perhaps the biggest spells of all, the aphrodisiacs of a fully developed character, an enriched mind, sexual freedom and experience, maternal manna, status, money, and a what the hell closing time joie de vivre. Oh, could you just? I mean, just want to have that tattooed on me back. And so I start there because, again, this is a story. And Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes says stories stimulate and activate a different part of our listening ear. Stories realize or make real what we just talked about in that last paragraph on the formidable allures denied to the young that more mature women possess. And so with our first gem, I want to tell you another story from my own life, which is a couple of years ago. I remember hiking with a friend who was very small and petite and had blonde hair and was somebody that I deeply respected and admired. And I was hiking behind her, and I noticed my mind delivering a message of, see, this was during a time of difficult heartbreak in my life. I remember my mind saying, see, she's thin, she's blonde, and she's loved and lovable, and that's why you're not. Of course, this didn't happen on the conscious realm. These thoughts hit like flares sent up in the sky, but I caught it. And thankfully, the great romance that I've had with my own inner wisdom and inner sovereign self piped in and said, actually, sweetie, you're just confused about power. And so that's our first gem, is a question to drop in for yourself, is when you find yourself in comparison or in self-loathing around the topic of aging, or fear, if you're someone who doesn't identify as part of the aging population yet, or the midlife population yet, and you're really afraid of that looming birthday, whatever your number is. A question to ask yourself is, what kind of power do I want to live my life by? And I remember a couple years ago, I lost some weight and I felt very different in my body. And one of the things that I noticed was I felt dramatically less suppressed. You know, I felt a kind of attention coming towards me where I felt like I really pleased those around me, even if it was in an unhealthy way. And that power can be very intoxicating. Like, that is power. To say that it's not real power, I think, is flipping things into the binary of real power and false power. It's a power. Power is power. But I think about the quote from Amanda Doyle that in a system of erasure of this deeper, inner, more authentic kind of power, when we win in that system, we lose ourselves. And these are two very real types of power. It's simply, what kind of power do I want to serve? And what kind of power do I wish to embody? And is the kind of power that allows me to win in that kind of a system actual power to me? One of the things I think about a lot when it comes to power is sustainability. So again, youth and beauty and thinness in our culture give a kind of power, but is it a sustainable power? And I think about this, a great story to demonstrate this is what I have seen so many people unlock, a deeper way of being with their power inside of themselves whenever they come on one of my retreats or participate in one of my burlesque classes. There is an embodiment of feminine power that is so pure and so potent when the instinctual, sensual body takes over, and that body, that energy is timeless. It's the kind of energy that could bring anyone to their knees. It is not a subservient kind of power, nor is it a dominant kind of power. I think of it as a sovereign kind of power. And in the presence of this power, the veil of the preciousness and timelessness of the feminine lifts. And I notice this nautilus effect take place in a woman when she starts practicing the Queen's Walk, which is one of the things I teach in my classes, or the posturing that I teach in my classes. There is this spiraling from the inner outwards instead of chasing the spiral or being whirlpooled and drowned by the spiral of trying to compete in a system where the target is always moving. And so coming back to that question, what kind of power do I want to live by, sets the intention, which determines the trajectory of the entire journey. As the Buddha once said, all of your life arises from the very tip of your intention. Okay, so that was more of an internal question and shift. Now we're moving into the embodiment part, my favorite part. And this is a gem all around timeless shapes. So I have a friend, another story. I have a friend who recently injured her back. And I said, can I come over and give you a mental-aided massage? And she said, absolutely. And this is a friend I'm very, very close to. And she is in her late 50s. And she is one of the most sensual, radiant, gorgeous women that I know. She just has that spark, she just has this endless, timeless, ever persistent spark inside of her. And she was naked, and I was telling her a story, and she was laying in a way where she was like on her side, and one knee was bent, and her head was propped up on her hand. And I could barely hold it together. She just looked so ravishing. And I told her I felt like Aphrodite and Artemis and Lakshmi and Shakti, and the whole cast was there with us in the room in her embodiment, even with a tweaked back. And this is the power of embodying that energy that we just talked about, that timeless, nautilus outward energy in the shape of the body. When I was a little girl, I had a lot of time by myself. I had a lot of unstructured, unoccupied time. And one of the things I would do is I would read magazines like 17 and YM, and I would sit in front of the mirror and I would pose, and I would position myself like the models with, one curled fist under my chin and my head slightly turned downward. And I would just really study the shapes of what I was seeing, which really comes in handy in a photo shoot. And in this episode, obviously I would love to invite you into my personal parlor and show you everything that I know about shapes and allure and a technique or a method that I call curves and angles that I teach in my live classes. But for the purposes of today, what I'll invite you to do is I'll share one little detail about curves and angles, which is that everything in nature is a contraction and an expansion. all of life is contraction and expansion. And when we look at the curves of the body, there is a natural contraction and expansion to the swell of the calf and the taper of the knee, the expanse of the thigh and the hip, like roses in full bloom at the top of a vase, and then the gentle swooping in of the waist, etc., etc. Everywhere on your body, there are hundreds and hundreds of curves and angles. And what my friend was doing is that naturally her body took on the shape of the angle of the knee as it was crossed over her body and the curve of her hip, the angle of her head propped up on her elbow, and the curve of her shoulder as it spilled out of that shape. And so something I would just really recommend, because it's really fun, is playing with your own curves and angles in the mirror. So if you're standing against a wall, is there a slight arch to your back that might accentuate the curve of your front and of your low back in contrast to the angle of the straight wall? When you're sitting in a chair, might you accentuate the angle of your elbow up on the chair back with the roundness of your shoulder? The slightest tilt of the head can accentuate your curves and angles. And actually, I do have a free video series on confident body language. And this video series is really geared more towards the stress response that happens in social situations or situations where you're receiving attention, and how to calm your nervous system and your body through shapes and body language and gesture that has a calming effect on the mind. And so if you go to schoolofsensualliving.com/confidence, you can get access to that 3 free video series. But anyway, curves and angles possess a timeless, ageless essence of feminine energy. If you look at Sophia Loren and the way that she maintains her ripe, juicy, dripping honeyed pear, still warm from the sun energy, when you look at her and what she wears and how she stands, she has lots and lots of curves and angles. Helen Mirren, also an icon of that closing time joie de vivre that Betsy talks about in her book. There's a regality to how she postures herself. So, curves and angles, can't recommend it enough. And then finally, our third gem, our final gem, is a quote from Ovid, which is, "Venus favors the bold." One of the most profound silver foxes in my life is actually my mom. And about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, when I was working at Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts, we would do these entrances where there would be entertainment and performance that would kind of warm up and delight the audience for when Mama Gina would come on stage. And that was really where my burlesque career started, as I performed at the talent show during our graduation. I did a fan dance, and I would sometimes do burlesque as entrances for Mama Gina or for special guests. And my mom was also a student at that time at the school. And I thought, wouldn't it be legendary if Jerry, my mom, came out on stage with me? And it was such a precious memory. And I actually won a storytelling competition, my very first storytelling competition in Phoenix, Arizona, at this wonderful place called Grounded 32, which is a creative community center helping make the world a little bit less lonely. If you're ever in Phoenix, check it out. I'll put it in the show notes. And so I told this story about how when I started researching the feminine and sensuality, I once brought a pack of oracle cards, like goddess oracle cards, home with me and asked my mom if she wanted to pull one. And she said, no, thank you, because they scared her because she thought that they were occult. And fast forward several years later, I am on stage. I've just performed my glove peel, and I'm beckoning from the wings. You can't see what or who I'm beckoning. And out comes Jerry, who is just shy of 70 years old, gorgeous gray hair, baby doll, pink baby doll that I myself sewed sequins and rhinestones on. And then we did a mother-daughter strip that ended in me twirling tassels alongside the same breasts that nursed me. And it was spectacular for everybody in that audience. 300 women had their DNA reorganized that day. And I invite you, as you hear that story, to notice what comes alive in you. And if you notice any threads or tendrils of warmth or excitement or possibility, you might notice, oh, that's a great story, but I could never do that. And just like everything we talk about here on this podcast, a reminder that the sensations of your body are life force meeting nerve. That is truth meeting nerve. And so this quote, Venus favors the bold, is to take a pause and welcome in whatever experience you might be having as you hear a story about a woman who has chosen to strip tease herself quite literally out of the harmful, limiting ideas about her as a sensual being and seductively step into the spotlight of her own radiance. And my friends, this has been a truffle of an episode to record. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, 5-star it, all the things. I'm trying to recall all the things I'm supposed to invite you to do, but really you know what to do. If this landed somewhere in your body and you wish to help broaden the reach of this podcast, I would be so honored to have you follow that impulse with your clicks and your reviews and the way that you share this podcast with your friends. It means the world to me to have you here on the floor of my closet with me, where I am currently recording this episode. And if you enjoyed what you heard here, savored what you felt here, and you want to learn more about how to take this more deeply into your life and into your embodiment through working with me one-on-one, you can learn more about that at schoolofsensualliving.com/coaching. It would be a delight to sit across the screen from you and have a heart-to-heart. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you in the next episode. For coaching, classes, and community in creating a lifestyle of embodiment, head over to schoolofsensualliving.com. There you'll find a free video series in how to intercept the stress response of anxiety and generate genuine feelings of ease and confidence through your body language. Head to schoolofsensualliving.com/confidence to get your first video today.